Hello and welcome to this student finance presentation, which is going to try and explain how to finance studies at Durham University for the academic year 2021 to 2022. My name is Neville Hallam and I'm the Deputy Head of the Scholarships and Student Funding Office. This talk, about 90% of this talk is going to be true whichever university the student ends up going to, but obviously there are some Durham specific bits in it as well. It is a finance talk, so I'm afraid it's not going to be visually very stimulating, and some of the slides have quite a lot of information on them, more information than sort of ideal branding PowerPoint presentations ought to have. However, with this being a recorded talk, you are at least able to pause as and when you wish to look at a slide more fully, or indeed to replay backwards or whatever to try and relook at information. So I apologise that some of the slides have got a lot of information on, but there is quite a bit of information to convey. So I will commence the talk. As you can see, the mouse does move on the screen as well, and at times I will use the mouse cursor to show particular areas of interest, and there are definitely some slides where you may well want to pause because it helps you try and work out what things mean in your own personal circumstances. Anyway, so I shall now commence the talk. I think it's probably going to take around about 30 minutes. Okay. So a brief outline. I will try and describe how much will a degree cost, what income is available, how to apply for financial support, how to manage financially, how the loan repayments work, and what help is available. The purpose of this presentation is to try and explain to the family, and particularly the student, how to get the nice crisp £5 note into the student's personal wallet, and also more sensibly how for it to leave in a sensible fashion rather than all disappearing in one go. Okay, so it's how to get hold of the money and hopefully how to spend it wisely. Word of caution though, funding is a moving subject at all times, and we are in uncertain times, and October 2021 is quite a long way off. Okay, so I know Brexit has officially happened, but we're still in the transition period, and quite where we will be by October 2021, who quite knows. In addition to Brexit, there has been a report, the Brown Report, into higher education funding and student finance. This has gone to government, and government are considering what to do about it. Of course, government have been slightly distracted of late, and so it is entirely possible that some things may change based on the findings of that report. And then finally, of course, at the time of recording, we're still in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, and so funding could well be affected by that as well. So that's all a long-winded way of saying that although I'm trying to tell you things now, it's well over a year away until they apply, and so you have to just be mindful that some things may change. In addition to that, I try and put dates on some of my slides as to showing whether they actually apply to October 2021 or whether indeed they are applying to October 2020. Because we don't know all of the funding issues yet or all of the funding levels, sometimes I can only show you what is available as of October 2020. And so you just have to try and infer what might be available then by October 2021. But I have tried to show in the slides the year that the information I'm showing relates to. Sorry, that's a bit complicated. Hope that makes sense. Anyway, so now moving on properly. How much will a degree cost? There are two types of degree costs to be considered. There are the upfront and concurrent costs, and there are the deferred costs. These are slightly odd phrases. What do I mean by them? So upfront and concurrent costs. These are your day-to-day living costs, okay? And so our accommodation contracts cover the academic year and include the induction week for freshers. And all new undergraduate students are offered accommodation in college managed accommodation in the first year. And virtually all students do that. There might be some circumstances why they don't, but nearly all students live in college in their first year. They move out into the private sector in their other years, but they can apply to return to live in university accommodation in their final year. That isn't necessarily guaranteed. It does depend on the college and other things, and sometimes they run a ballot. And to be honest, not everybody does want to return to live in their final year. And so there is an element of choice in there as well. Durham University has a wide range of rooms available, so I cannot give you a single college room price, but I've given you two examples here. These are October 2020 prices. But for a standard first year room, shared bathroom, but fully catered, that comes in at 7894. And another type of room, for example, an ensuite room, but self-catered, comes in at 6016. And as you can imagine, there are other permutations of room as well, which have different prices. However, the colleges section of our website should be able to guide you a little bit better. These are this year's prices, so of course I would expect some kind of inflationary uplift for the following year. These other costs, upfront and concurrent costs, they are everything other than the tuition fee. So it's your accommodation, your food, your books, your equipment, photocopying, printing, all of that, laundry, insurance, travel, leisure. So these are your day-to-day living costs. Some students may have extra costs, for example, students with dependents or disabilities, or some may have significant extracurricular activities such as sport and music, which may in turn have extra costs, whether it's sports equipment or tuition, specialist tuition for music if you're not doing a music degree, that kind of stuff. So it's very difficult to give you an average price because there is no such thing as an average student. You have lifestyle choices, you have needs, and then those two together and also how good people are at budgeting all affect on what their costs may be. But I have to try and give you an average cost, so I come up with an estimate of 2021 to 2022 academic year of might be around about £10,500. So what did I mean by the deferred costs? Well, those are, for most students, the tuition fee costs. The government offers tuition fee loans, which will pay these directly to the university. Money for these money for this loan is not required up front. The government will pay it, and the eligibility is not means tested. The loan repayments are deferred until after graduation and would not commence until the graduate is earning well over £25,000. So this is a deferred cost. Most students in the UK are eligible for these tuition fee loans. It does depend slightly on which home nation you're from, and I'll explain a bit more about that later on in the talk. So how much will a degree cost? If we take the course and living costs, £10,500 plus the tuition fees, which for this year are £9,250, you come up with a total of just under £20,000, £19,750. So what I'm now going to try and explain is how you can build up a support package available to provide and support that level of need. So a brief outline of the next part of this talk. I talk about tuition fee loans, maintenance loans, and then some other scholarships, bursaries, and the like that may be available to you. So you now see in the top right-hand corner, we have the England flag flying. This is because education funding is known as a devolved matter. And so the different governments of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England have slightly different support packages. I'm only going to talk about the England-specific packages here because the vast majority of our students are from England. But if you are from one of the other home nations, then obviously you do need to double check what support is available from your specific home nation. Okay, so within England, there is this tuition fee loan, which is the deferred cost. It's not means tested, but it's not compulsory. If you wish to pay the tuition fees up front without taking out a loan, that's perfectly fine. It's paid by the student loans company to the university, so it can only be used for tuition, but you would only start repaying it once your income is over 26,575. The previous slide that said 25,000, I've just realized is slightly out of date, which I need to amend. Actually, it's 26,575. So that's your tuition fee loan. Then there is also a maintenance loan. This is your loan, the student loan as it is called for most people. And the amount of that does depend on your household income. It can be worth up to a maximum of £9,203, assuming the student is living away from home. If you are from the Durham area and the student is wishing to live at home, then the maximum loan available there is £7,774 because the government assumes that you won't have such higher costs. Students are eligible for up to 46.6% of the maximum maintenance loan without your household income being assessed. This means that any student from England, providing they meet other certain criteria, such as how long you've been living in the country and that you haven't already previously studied for a degree, qualifies for a loan of £4,289. If you then choose to have your household income assessed, then you may qualify for more than this 4,289, up to the potential of the 9,203. It's a little bit complicated, so I've got another slide that tries to show that. This loan is paid out in 3 termly instalments, and this money does go direct to the student, and that provides their living costs, or contributes towards. All student funding works in terms of contributing towards, and here, like the tuition fee loan, you would only start repaying it once you start earning over £26,575. That is a recent uplift to 26,575, and you may well find a lot of literature that still says £25,000. So here is probably the most important slide of the entire talk, and this is trying to give you a guide as to how much loan the student may be eligible for. There are some assumptions. These are that the student is living away from home, not living at home, and is not studying in London. So as I said at the beginning, a lot of this talk is common to whichever university you apply for. However, if you are looking at student funding at a London university, then it is a different table because there is a London weighting. It also assumes a student is aged under 60 at the commencement of studies, and of course that you don't already have an undergraduate degree. So we have several columns here, and if you can follow the mouse, I'll look at this column first. This is household income column, okay? So although the student, in most cases, assuming you've just left from sixth form or whatever, doesn't have an income, it does relate to the household income in which the student is living, okay? And the amount of household income in that household will then affect how much maintenance loan is available to the student. And so you can see here, I said what the maximum loan was previously, £9,203. So that is available if the student is from a household that has an income of less than £25,000. And then as you can see, as household income increases, so the amount of maintenance loan available to the students decrease until you eventually get to this £4,289 value, which was the non-means tested amount. Therefore, if you are in a student, if the student is in a household where the income is over 62,249, then you don't necessarily have to go to the means tested element, because you can just apply for that basic loan regardless, okay? So everybody qualifies for this amount, and if you want the higher values, then you have to have the household income assessed. Now, what is meant by household income? That isn't quite as simple as taking the P60s of the wage earners in the household together. They do make certain allowances. For example, if the student is the eldest child of the household, then a calculation is made that offsets some of your household income to allow for the fact that you still have younger dependent children in the house, siblings or whatever in the house. And then there are other factors as well. Unfortunately, the only way of accurately getting your household income assessed is to actually apply online. There isn't any quick proxy. So your P60s are a guide, but assuming that it's not an only child that we're talking about, then there could be other changes that will make a difference in household income, i.e. reduce your household income, because the government acknowledges that you have other needs to support. So that can change each year. The assessment process that Student Finance England do is tweaked from year in, year out. And so unfortunately, the only way for sure is by applying and going through it. But it would be the same whichever university you went to. They don't tend to change it that much, but it is something you have to apply for. So that gives you an idea of household income and the maintenance loan. Then we have this rather cryptic column here called the assessed contribution. That is the government term. What we might reasonably understand this to mean actually is parental contribution. In that the government assumes that at certain levels that the family or the household of the student will be contributing towards their living costs as well. So what you can see here, by the time you get to a household income of £45,000, then the government assume a family contribution of £280, moving up to 2,556 when you're into the above 62,249. which then gives you this value that you can see being repeated here. The government give you or assume a funding package of at least £6,845 for each student. The assessed contribution is not compulsory, and indeed, as I think you can probably determine from there, is actually quite low in terms of need. You've seen what I've said you might need to live as a student, and you can see that that total column is coming in less. So in reality, either parental contribution or student working contribution is probably needed for a lot of students in order to top up to a level of funding that will actually provide their full needs. Okay, so although the government talk in terms of this assessed contribution, they come up with this total, but they only ever call these as a contribution to your costs. And so actually the truth is that students and or their families do often need to contribute a little bit more to try and get up to a reasonable funding level. That's all quite complicated, but I will try. Hopefully you can pause that screen and have a more detailed look in there and try and determine what your household income is. So what are the supporters available? You'll now also note that the flag in the top right-hand corner has now gone back to the Union Jack. And so I am now again talking to students from England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. But if you're from the Channel Islands or the Isle of Man, unfortunately you're still not involved in this slight part of the talk. And because those two areas have their own student funding packages as well. However, the university, and true of a lot of universities, we have a bursary scheme that provides some support for students depending on your household income. And so what we have, we call it the Durham Grant Scheme, but you may see it referred to in other university websites in their own version as a bursary. We have something called the Durham Grant Scheme, and if you have a household income of less than £25,000, then you could be eligible for a Durham grant of £2,000. And how this generally works is if you're living in college, which most students do in their first year, then it would be deducted from your college accommodation in the form of a discount. And if you're living out, then it would be paid out as a cash bursary to you. And this is paid in approximately 3 equal instalments, one for each term. And so that's a contribution towards your living costs. Now, if you have a household income of higher than 25,000, but less than 42,875, then there is still a Durham grant, but it's no longer at £2,000. The simplest way of thinking about this is the closer you are to £25,000, the nearer your grant is to £2,000. And then when you get down to the 42,875 end, then your grant is around about £200. And if your household income is somewhere in between, it's a sliding scale, and hopefully if you pause the screen, you can be able to make a rough estimate of what your Durham grant might be. So that is, both this one and the full £2,000 if you have a household income of less than £25,000 are both significant contributions towards your living costs. So what else might there be? We have a variety of other scholarships. Firstly, we have some personal development scholarships. These are have been running for quite some time now, but there are new ones coming online. And so the name by October 2021 might be different. But what they are scholarships whereby if your student has a talent, it's to help encourage that talent within the university. So often these personal development scholarships can be in the area of sport, music, or the arts. And so, there are sports scholars, music scholars, and, we're developing arts productions and things like that in the university. So if you have a particular talent in those areas, and there's a few different scholarship schemes that are supporting them, then there may be scholarships available for that. Certainly in sports terms, then you have to be, probably playing slightly ahead of county level. And our sports people are tracking people and knowing who is doing what. Music, obviously, you have to be excellent in that, and it doesn't mean that necessarily you're studying music. So these scholarships are moving, and so how they will look in 2021, I can't quite say, but there's a lot of work being done on developing those. So if you have a talent in these areas, then it is definitely worth coming back and looking at that. Okay. And hopefully we will have a more comprehensive list of options available to you around about October. But they are competitive, okay? So it's a competitive application process for those. Other scholarships. So if you are from the County Durham area, then this is a very good scholarship, Robert Young Scholarship. He is a local entrepreneur, and he was a County Durham councillor, and he's established an annual scholarship scheme of up to £10,000 a year for state educated students from eligible County Durham postcodes and household income levels. Okay, so if you are from the County Durham area and you think this applies to you, this is definitely a scholarship worth looking at to seeing whether you can benefit from that. And slightly further afield, we have something called the St Nicholas Educational Trust Scholarship, and this is if you are from the city of Newcastle. And unfortunately, I do mean the city of Newcastle, the 26 wards of Newcastle City. If you are from Gateshead, I'm afraid you're, unfortunately for this scholarship, on the wrong side of the river. It stems from something that began in the Victorian era. St Nicholas's Trust was looking to provide education for the street children of Newcastle, I believe. And hence its whatever its covenants or whatever its charitable basis is, has got a clearly restricted geographical area. But obviously if you qualify for this, and this can be worth up to £2,500 a year, so that is something else that is very worth looking at if you are from the city of Newcastle. So those two that I've just spoken about are, if you like, geographical scholarships, but there are another sort of scholarship can be basically you are the student or the child of somebody from a particular profession, and so there are, for example, some military scholarships, and this explains these can be worth up to £5,000. So again, that's very useful, and this can be either for ex-military personnel, or it can be for an immediate family member. Different organisations do things slightly differently, but if you are either from a military family or indeed are an ex-service person, then these might well be useful for you. And this is just to give you a bit of an idea about how scholarships work. You saw the first one with personal development. They were as if you had a particular talent or interested in something. Then you had geographical ones, and then you have occupational ones as well. We've only listed a very few in this talk, but if you are from a family of a specific well-established profession, you may well find that the professional bodies of that organisation may well have scholarships for you. And if you're from other regions of the country, there may be equivalent educational trusts like the St Nicholas one for whichever city or town or county that you live in, and so it is perhaps worth checking, see if any such exist, or indeed asking in your sixth forms, because obviously if you live in that area, your sixth form may well be aware of them. So it's just to give you an idea that scholarships exist for a variety of different reasons, and you sometimes have to think a little bit laterally to try and see if you fit into those areas. Other scholarships, the colleges and departments have some. They tend to be a lot smaller, and so they're not going to, you know, substantially help fund your studies, but they might be able to provide a little bit extra, and so it is definitely worth looking at those. And then we have an overall online scholarships database. So the web address is there, which means you can search by subject or area or things like that to try and see what scholarships may be available to you. Nearly all scholarships are very competitive, and so the sooner you start looking, the better. However, if you go away straight away and look in this website now, I definitely recommend that you keep coming back probably every 2 or 3 months, because new scholarships come online, old ones disappear. And as I've said before, October 2021 is still some way off. And so just because you don't see anything now doesn't necessarily mean there won't be something available for you later on. So now we're going to come over onto other types of funding and benefits and allowances. As a general rule, students are not eligible for government benefits or allowances, but the odd exception does exist, and specifically there is something called the Disabled Students Allowance. The chances are, if you are eligible for this, you will already know you are, but I will just briefly outline here just in case. And again, this would be applicable to most universities in the land if you're applying to them. You have to meet certain criteria, and these meet the definition of disability under the Equality Act in 2010. So if you meet those criteria, then it might provide support. The support it gives you is dependent upon your individual needs and not on your income. And so there will often have to be a needs assessment of your need. but it can do such things as contribute costs. But some things you still are expected to contribute something towards. So, for example, if it is determined that you need something, either a specialized computer or specialized software with a computer, you would still be expected to contribute the first £200 towards a computer, on the thought that all students will need a computer. So if you like, the standard computer you are buying, because as a student you would need that. But then if you need either adaptive measures on the computer or specialist software, then that's where the DSA, Disabled Students Allowance, can help top that up. But other support things might be non-medical helpers or extra travel means, that kind of stuff. And my colleagues in the disabilities unit have also given me this YouTube link. Obviously with COVID-19, there is some extra bits of support available for that. Again, I don't know where we'll be in the crisis by October 2021, hopefully in a lot better than we are currently. But this is what is currently being put out there for students. So obviously that information on that YouTube may change as well over time. So now we come into other areas of support, and as I alluded to earlier on, parental contributions are a significant way of supporting students, but I also recognise that not all families are in a position to do that. And so, where households are able to, then making regular payments or monthly payments to the student can be very much of assistance. But other forms of assistance could be, of course, looking after the student during the vacation periods, or sometimes one-off costs that a student may have, for example, dissertation costs or something like that. So we're fully aware that not every household is able to assist every student in a way, in the same way. So, it's not just an expectation that, money can be provided, but on the other hand, it may be that there are ways that a student can be supported. An example perhaps might be funding the student's mobile phone. You've probably been doing that once the student is in sixth form, and that's something already in your sort of budget cycle, so maybe that's something you can help. However, there is another form of assistance, and that's where parents or the household can help by permitting the sharing of the household income. You will have seen in the talk that when you apply for loans, your household income is assessed. That information is confidential between you and the student loans company. However, you will have also seen that the Durham Grant Scheme relies on the household income to determine what you're available for. So to get hold of the Durham Grant, or DGS as this slide says here, if you consent to share your household income during the loan application process, then it means things like the Durham Grant Scheme can work automatically. So that's a form of parental contribution, the sharing of information. I think currently the student loans company have that set up that you share that information by default, and you can elect not to. But it is your choice, and you will be given that choice. And so it's an odd thing, why would you want to share your household income with the university? I would recommend that you do permit that sharing, because it does then mean that other things like the Durham Grant can occur. There won't be any other means of testing whether you qualify for the Durham Grant, because we go through what the SLC have done and just get the value. We don't have the capacity or the means or the know-how to assess your household income. So we just rely on the student loans company, if you consented to share the information, to pass that information on to us. But that is a form of parental contribution, the sharing of data. So then we come on to the student themselves, and there is no doubt that a lot of students help themselves through college by earning some money. So we have the Careers, Employability and Enterprise Centre at the university. They don't just exist to try and help the student get a graduate job at the end of their course. They do also try and help students get part-time or vacation jobs. So they're a useful resource to look at, and some students have obviously been working before they come to university, if they can maintain those ties. So when they're back at vacation, that's all very well and good. And the other thing to look at is Durham is quite a small city, and so sometimes, you're all, I think there's 18,000 students in Durham, so there's quite a lot of people competing for student type jobs, and so it may be that better opportunities exist for getting student jobs within the student's hometown or city during the vacation periods. It's not just a question of thinking, I've got to find it in Durham. There's some other benefits to working whilst a student, because it can help actually when you do go into the graduate profession, in whatever field you have chosen. If you think about it, if you've had any work experience whatsoever, you're probably going to look better to a prospective employer, even if you've got an identical degree and everything else, to somebody that hasn't worked. So even if the work is not necessarily remotely related to what you hope to do as a graduate career, the discipline of work and some of the, behaviors and skills that you will learn in paid employment are things that you can help sell yourself, and of course will probably help you more than in interview than if a student hasn't had any form of work. That said, Durham is an academically intensive university, and so we are fully aware that actually you're coming to university to study, and so it's a balancing act. We fully accept that, and you've got no point in coming to university unless you're going to get your degree, but you don't want to be working all hours under the sun and not be able to study. So it is a balancing act. So that is a summary of what income is available. 2021 is still some way off. Things are changing. The new loans levels, for example, have not yet been announced, that kind of stuff. So it is something you'll need to keep an eye on, but hopefully I've given you a broad outline of the types of income that are available and a rough estimate of what type of funding you may be able to get depending on your individual circumstances. So now I'm going to talk about how you actually apply for financial support, and you'll see the England flag is flying in the corner again. So if you are from England, you apply through what is known as Student Finance England, and you apply for your tuition fee loan and your maintenance loan. And assuming you're going to have your household income assessed, then the student has to start the process off and fill out some information, and then they will be required to give the usually the email address of the people that are basically funding the student now in order to complete that household assessment. Okay, the application process begins around Easter, and you must submit your application by the deadline to guarantee funding for the start of the academic year. That deadline is likely to be around the end of May 2021, but they announce a deadline every year to allow for circumstances. So for example, this year it was a bit later. It is a deadline, but if you miss it, it's not the end of the world. It's just the deadline by which they guarantee funding will be available by. If you do it later, then it depends on how late as to how much they're going to, whether you're going to get your money in time. Obviously, you do it early June, the chances are everything will still be fine. Obviously, if you do it come the end of September, then there will be a delay before the student funding is available for the student. So it's an important deadline, but we realise not the government realise not everybody can make it. And so once they say a deadline, you can actually apply afterwards for quite a period of time. This is just a quick look at the website. It changes every year, but it's not the whizziest of websites. You go online, click Start Now, and it goes through. It has been quite streamlined, so it asks far fewer questions than it did a few years ago, but you will still perhaps need to start looking for bits of information that you didn't know you had, let alone news that you needed to keep. It is something you have to do every year. So if there's a particularly difficult bit of information that you didn't know how to find and took you a while, it's worth remembering it because you have to do it each year. The students do have to apply every year to renew their student loan, and the household income is assessed every year. So if you're in an occupation whereby your earnings each year are potentially quite different, especially if you're within, say, the Durham Grant territory, you might find that the availability of support either increases or decreases during the student's time at university, depending on what your household income is like for that year in question. Okay, there is also a bit of a lag time in that when you're doing it next year, it'll go back to the previous tax year usually. This is, of course, slap bang in the middle of COVID, so it may be that your finances at that time of assessment and at the time of when you actually need it are different, either positive or negative. And if it's negative and actually you don't have as much money as you did for the period that's being assessed, then there can be steps to do what's called an in-year reassessment, but it has to be a substantial change of income. The best way of figuring that out is probably much nearer the time when you know what your situation is, and there are ways of getting hold of the student loans company to find out whether such things are possible. I'm just flagging it to you now because I'm aware that you know, we're in challenging economic times, and so the fact that the period that they are assessing does not necessarily relate to the period which you are then living in. There could be substantial changes, so do be aware of that, and there can sometimes be steps to be made to help offset that difference. Of course, the government may well do something to try and address that, or at least give higher indications, because I think there will be a substantial number of people whereby the assessment period of earnings and what the actuality is at that current point in time are quite different. So hopefully there will be enough guidance out there to cover that. So that's mostly been about how you get the crisp £5 note into the student's personal wallet. This next bit is to try and explain how for it to leave in as sensible a fashion as possible. The truth is, especially if you're a student that's come out of sixth form, this will be the first time for many people whereby you've really had to manage financially, okay? You're away from home, thank of mum and dad or whatever, and so you do have to try and learn the skills of budgeting. And rather weirdly, the way student funding works is it tends to give you 3 months' money all up front, which is not how most people budget. Most people in employment kind of get 1 month in arrears and budget on a monthly basis. Whereas students are given essentially 2 or 3 months money up front and then have to learn how to budget to make it last until the end of that time. So it's a little bit different to how most people live, and you're also thrown straight into the deep end in that respect, because a lot of people won't have necessarily had to plan their budgets. So, but budget is the key. Make a budget and stick to it. You'll make the most of your time at university without worrying about your financial situation if you manage to crack how to budget and budget sensibly. So how to do that? There are a variety of options. So this little slide here tries to show you. First of all, investigate. Well, you've committed to listening to this talk this far. So that shows a fair amount of staying power and that you're willing to investigate. There's the university website, there's the National Union of Students, there's a website called the Student Room, and then there's somebody called Martin Lewis, who you've probably heard of. He has quite an interest in student finance, actually. So if you haven't been following Martin Lewis, then he's somebody that's worth looking at. So all of those sites try and tell you what is available, which is a lot of what my talk has been thus far. That's how you get the money, but then also ask. So if students are not used to budgeting, try and work out, perhaps doing the family shop, why certain decisions are being made. It's not worth buying, 8 weeks worth of yogurts because they're on a special offer if they're going to go off in the first couple of weeks. That's a bit, I'm sure that doesn't actually happen, but you get the idea. You have to budget accordingly, but also make sure that you don't lose things that are perishable, that kind of stuff. Open days, you're attending the virtual open day. Campus tours, of course, they're not quite available at the moment, but hopefully that's something you'll be able to do at some point. But most critically, friends and family. A lot of new students have perhaps cousins that are only a year or two ahead of them, or they have friends that they know from sixth form that are a year or two ahead of them, and also or friends of the family. So if you're able to find a friendly current student, find out what advice they have. Nearly all students will make a financial mistake or two, and so it's quite useful learning what those are so that you don't fall into them. Once you've done all of that, then calculate and set a budget. Some of budgeting is personal lifestyle choices. You have to be sensible in that, obviously. But also you have the freedom in many cases of being away from home with independent financial means. So it's learning how to do it. But critically also, just setting a budget is fine, but you actually have to maintain that budget. And to do that, you have to keep checking what you're spending, okay? So most students now are quite happy with online banking and that kind of stuff. Review your expenditure, work out what you're spending on a weekly or couple of weekly basis or whatever, and predict if you're going to overspend. And then, curtail whatever your bad habits are or whatever to try and get back on track. but don't bury your head in the sand, because it will all catch up with you sooner or later. So it's a life skill. Unfortunately, students have to try and figure out very quickly. But most students do. So, but most students also make the odd mistake, but you learn from them and you move on. So here are some suggestions. The world is always a much better place if you're warm, dry and fed. Therefore, your priorities really are going to be rent, food and your utility bills. Obviously, if you're living in college in your first year, that is rather simpler, especially if it's a catered college. But then there are other things such as contents insurance, toiletries, transport, stationery, all of that kind of stuff. Those are all things that enable you to live well, study well, and hopefully have a little bit of social life as well. Once you have budgeted for your essential items, then you can calculate how much you have left to spend each week on luxury items. So I've given some examples of luxury items there, but I've included mobile, so I'll come back to that in a minute. But things like your Spotify subscription, a bit of leisure time, clothes. Mobile is an essential item, absolutely granted. However, there are such things as luxury mobile phones. And so it's not an uncommon scenario that a student may go to college having always had whatever phone their family would provide or they could afford. Then they have a bit of financial independence and they want the latest all singing, all dancing, whatever type of phone. And that's where you could end up in a luxury mobile phone. And of course, the student is over 18 and can sign up to whatever credit contract, and spending £45 a month on a mobile might seem good when you've just got your maintenance loan in your bank, but you're often locked in for 2 or 3 years and it may actually not be financially affordable later on at such high levels. So it's you know, having a phone and having a an internet enabled phone, I think is fairly essential. However, just beware of getting into the luxury end of the market or into the luxury kind of contracts, because mobile phone contracts are very difficult to break. So how else to manage financially? Look out for discounts. You know, don't hop on a train without your young person's rail card. You've got NUS cards or uni day apps to get discounts off. Don't buy all the books on the reading list. Do make use of free libraries and that kind of stuff. I've mentioned mobile phones there. And then planning your leisure activities, that kind of stuff. If you are somebody that's used to having a gym membership, chances are that there is much cheaper options available at the university or in your colleges. So just be very wary about signing up to something like that, because gym contracts are also very difficult to break. And then there are the extra kind of costs, perhaps TV license or birthday cards, and study costs such as photocopying, etc. It's not uncommon that actually students have never really tended to buy birthday cards. Somebody in the household's always bought them for them to pass on. But if you're away from home, you know, it's just getting into that culture of keeping some money aside for doing that kind of stuff. And other things in life. It's just all part of how to manage and budget appropriately. So that's all been pretty much common sense. We're now going to talk about how the loan repayments work, and they can be a little bit, I won't say they're not common sense, but they're a bit different. Student loans are different to any other form of borrowing, and the England flag is back up in the corner again now, but each of the home nations have, you know, similar sorts of repayment things. The reason student loans repayments are different is because the amount you repay does not depend on the amount you have borrowed, but on how much you are earning as a student. And I can see yet again, I've left 25,000 in there. It should say 26,575 on that top bullet point. So currently, in your cohort year, you would only restart paying your student loans once you're earning over 26,575. And you'd repay 9% of your income above 26,575. So to make the numbers simple, what I'm saying is if you start earning £30,575, then you'd repay 9% of £4,000, which is £360 a year or £30 a month, or roughly £1 a day. Interest is applied at RPI plus 3% whilst you're studying. That RPI plus 3% value can, well, RPI obviously can change. Currently it's still plus 3%, but of course the government could change that as well. But the point is, interest is applied whilst you're studying. Then the interest rate when you're working changes depending on how much you're working. And so it could be RPI or somewhere in between RPI and RPI plus 3%. So that's all quite complicated. It's very difficult for you, well, virtually impossible for you to work out what your interest will be on your loan until you know what you are earning and what the RPI rates are, which of course you won't know until you've graduated. But the point is that your debt, your loan debt, is increasing all of the time because of interest, okay? But your repayments are fixed depending on how much you are earning, okay? The tuition maintenance loans are combined repayment, so you only have to make one loan repayment deduction per month, assuming you've taken out both the tuition fee and the maintenance loan. They're generally deducted from your salary through the tax system. And if you've not repaid your loan within 30 years, it will be written off, and your loan will not affect your credit rating. But be careful with that, because not everything is your credit rating. It does affect, of course, your disposable income. So if you do end up applying for mortgages and that kind of stuff, the loan is taken into account in terms of what is your disposable income, but it isn't affecting your credit rating. They're two slightly different things. So loan repayments are different to any other form of borrowing. And if you borrowed anything, then in the early years at least, you'll be repaying the same amount. And the example I like to try and give is if you imagine student A who has only taken out a tuition fee loan for 1 year, okay, and then goes into the same graduate job as student B that has taken out a tuition fee loan every year and a full maintenance loan every year. So one person's debt is probably just under £10,000. The other person's debt is possibly around about £60,000. They both walk into the same graduate job. The deductions from their salary will both be identical because it is a percentage of your income. The difference is, of course, how long they may be in repayment for. But as you've seen, you know, repayments are not that high when you're still even earning at the £30,000 or whatever level. So it will in many cases take a substantial number of years, even for student A to pay off their debt, let alone student B. But student A is obviously much more likely to ultimately pay off all of their debt and get out of the system more than student B is. But the government have said that if you don't repay your loan within 30 years, whatever is left will be written off. So there are some people that view it more as a graduate tax rather than a loan, because they think that actually these graduates will probably be repaying for much of their working life. I don't know, the system hasn't been running yet long enough to give any clear indications, but there is a belief that an awful lot of money will be written off. But it is worth knowing that it all relates on how much you are earning, not on how much you have borrowed. So certainly in the first few years after graduation, whether you try to avoid loans, you will not necessarily be better off than somebody that's taken all loans possible if you have borrowed anything. That's all quite complicated, so it might be worth looking at this slide and the previous one and playing it through to try and understand what it means. But student loan repayments are very different. Nearly at the end now, so finally, what help is available? Durham, with our unique college system, is very good in that there are student support staff available that you can go and talk to about financial or indeed many other worries that you may have. And you know, those members of staff have seen nearly everything at some point or other in their careers. And, you know, in most cases, especially if the student looks for help early enough, they can assist you and get you back onto the straight and narrow. You might have a slightly more austere term, perhaps, but once you've learnt whatever the lesson is and move on sensibly, then hopefully you're all right. And then we also have something called the Student Support Fund, and this is for students who find themselves unexpectedly in financial hardship. You do have to come to university with a sound financial plan, but obviously life can intervene and things can unexpectedly happen that puts students into financial hardship, and the Student Support Fund is then able to try and assist in those circumstances. It isn't an unlimited pot and it is a means tested award, but every year we help people, you know, retain themselves in higher education through to something that due to something that the student would not have expected to happen, perhaps a family redundancy or something like that. That is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for you know, playing it and coming this through. I hope you found it useful. A lot of it is true whichever university the student may end up going to. Obviously, I hope you come to Durham. And if you have Durham specific questions or whatever, then you can see our email address there, or indeed our webpage. As you go through the sort of journey of getting to university, do keep looking and seeing how the student finances are being changed or altered, or hopefully in most cases just the final figures being put out there so that you know what income you will have. It is all about planning, and you know, you've hopefully gone through this talk, and hopefully it explains most of the questions that you may have. But if you're still unsure of anything, then do contact us there. Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the virtual open day that the university is offering. And when your A-levels come, good luck with them. Thank you very much.